Hey everyone, I hope this video finds you well. So today is our first day of our mythology unit. That is what you guys voted on wanting to do for our next unit, and I'm really excited to talk about it. Mythology was one of my favorite subjects when I was a kid. My mom used to buy me books and these weird trading cards about mythology when I was in elementary school. I loved studying the Odyssey and the Iliad when I was in college, and it's just something I've always been interested in and I've always had a passion for. It's also great because you guys, some of you grew up with the Percy Jackson books and the Percy Jackson movies, so you at least have an introduction to Greek mythology, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's Nordic mythology, there's Japanese and Chinese mythology and different Asian cultures, African, Native American. There's so many types of mythologies, and they're all just so fascinating, and you might not even realize that they're a part of your culture or a part of how you see the world until I start pointing it out. And even if you're not familiar with it, it's always interesting to see how people used to or even still view the world and the types of viewpoints that they have. So with mythology, first we have to understand what is a myth, what goes into the actual creation of a myth. And if you look on your graphic organizer, if you open that Google document, you'll see that there are 3 criteria for what a myth is. And I'm going to go over those really quick. So you'll see here that the 3 criteria for myths are that it's connected to regions, traditions, or belief systems. Now that "or" is a big part of the criteria. It doesn't have to have all 3 of these. It can be connected to any of them. A lot of people think all mythologies are religions, and that's not always true. Sometimes it's part of a belief system, but other times it's just a traditional way of telling stories. It's just a regional thing. Not everybody always had the internet, and stories were a way that people entertained themselves, or it was just a way to learn a lesson. So it could be any of those things, not always just a religion. The second thing is that it answers the question why. So it could be, why does something operate this way? Why do I need to behave this way? Why do I have to be careful about this thing? And these myths served either as explanations before science had an explanation, or as a way to guide you in how to act as a person. They were warnings. Thirdly, another criteria is that it follows patterns, and that's the big thing we're going to be talking about today is patterns. We're going to look into what things reoccur in a lot of these myths and what makes these different patterns happen in most of these myths. So what makes them different from, let's say, folk tales or legends. And the difference is these 3 criteria. So I'm going to go into some notes about the patterns within different mythology, but before I do that, I want to make sure you have this Google document open, and it is titled Patterns in Mythology. So make sure you have this open. You opened it from Classroom, and you should have this open alongside the video as I go through some notes explaining these patterns. You'll see here it already tells you the 3 criteria of a myth that I already spoke about, and then here are the notes in a table underneath. So it lists 7 different patterns that you'll see within mythology, and then it also gives you the explanations or the definitions of those different patterns. As I show you some notes, I'm going to give you examples for each pattern, and I want you to take notes of those examples in each box for each pattern. I would advise that you pause the video after I give each example and write it down, and then replay the video for the next example. At the end, after I give all of the examples, pause for a moment and you'll go to this last column right here where you're going to talk about where you have seen these patterns, whether those are patterns in film, music, books, or anywhere that you might have seen these same patterns used, or even if you know any myths, just adding some more examples to your understanding. But with that, I'm going to go into an explanation of these 7 patterns you'll often see in mythology. So our first pattern is the natural element, and as stated in your document in here, what it means is that elements that are found in nature, are used symbolically within these myths. So anything having to do with nature at all, with seasons, with leaves, with plants of any kind, symbolizing something else. That's often a pattern within mythology. So, for example, if we look at Greek mythology, we have Zeus, who is the god of lightning. He's a god of a lot of things, but lightning's one of them. So lightning in this case is a natural element. It's part of the weather. But whenever gods in Greek myth get angry, like when Zeus gets angry, he'll throw his lightning. Or other gods will be sad and they'll make it rain. Or there's a god who, when she was sad, she actually controls crops and farming. And when she was sad, it caused farms to not grow anything because winter would happen. And when she was happy, spring would happen. So that was some natural elements. But in the case of Zeus and his lightning, he often throws the lightning when he's angry. Therefore, it explains that idea of why I talked about earlier. The reason that people would think lightning would show up in the sky or storms would show up was because Zeus was angry. So it led to this myth that lightning was the gods being angry at you for something that you did. Next, we have the pattern of animals. So in mythology, animals can represent human qualities, distractions, or desires. The animals used vary depending on the culture. So in some Scandinavian and Nordic mythologies, there's the Hellhest. And the Hellhest is a horse that would represent death. So some would say when you see this horse, a few days later you would die. It led, in some cases, people, when somebody died, before you could go to the place where they were going to be buried, they would send in a live horse, and when it came out, they would call it the Hellhest. It was this death horse. So in these myths, these animals came to represent these bigger ideas or these bigger symbols, such as this horse representing death. Colors. So the fun thing with this one is Egyptians often use colors in their mythologies. It's what led to such bright paintings and beautiful pottery and things that they created in Egyptian culture, because a lot of these colors represented different things, and they're often used symbolically in lots of myths, not just Egyptian. So we see here Set, also written as Seth sometimes, who is the god of victory and the god of chaos in Egyptian mythology. He's often represented as having red hair and red eyes. And aside from representing normal things we now associate it with, like anger, red was also associated with victory and with war. And Set was known to have victory over another one of the gods throughout his mythology. So he was often painted even full red skin in order to represent that chaos and that victory that he often held. And a lot of Egyptian associations with color are reasons we associate those colors with certain emotions nowadays, and why we have those different symbols continued in different literature. Next, circles are often used in mythology as well. They could represent cycles, they could represent unity, or they could represent life. A lot of it has to do with beginnings and endings and rebirth, because circles are never ending. In the case of Greek mythology, we have Eon, which you might have heard that word before, eons, and he is the god of time. When he's depicted in a lot of Greek sculptures and paintings, he's depicted as being in a circle to represent the circle of time, or the constant continuation of birth and death and rebirth. So that would be an example of circles being used just from how he's represented in a lot of his artistic depictions. Creation myths are some of my favorite patterns within mythology. I love seeing in different mythologies just how they think the world started. And that really goes back to that why question, like why or how did this happen? And most, if not all, mythologies have some type of myth for just how did we come to be? How are we created? And one great creation myth is a Chinese creation myth of Pengu. So in this myth, the universe was said to have taken about 18,000 years to be created. And during that time, it's within a cosmic egg, which I love. So it's in a cosmic egg, and within that egg, yin and yang are forming, which is a concept you've probably heard of before. It's balance within life. And then one day from that egg, Pangu emerged, and one depiction of him is here. Usually he's depicted as this giant figure with horns. And he is the creator of the universe. So he comes out and he uses yin and yang and balance and creates basically all things within the universe. But that's one big creation myth where it's how we came to be, how the earth came to be. And there are smaller creation myths as well, just explaining why things are the way they are. We're going to look at some myths where we see where spiders come from. So it can be something as small as a spider to as big as to where did we come from? Aside from gods and goddesses in mythology, there are also heroes. And mythological heroes usually have to complete this giant, huge, difficult task, despite temptations they come across. And at the very end, they receive a reward for going through all these tasks. And of course, a big one that many of you have heard of thanks to Disney is Hercules. In Greek and Roman myths, though, he's often referred to as Heracles. So you might see that in some of the stories that we read or are referenced, where he's referred to as Heracles. And his trials are a little bit different than the Disney movie. He's not quite as gallant and sweet as we see in the Disney movie, but he does go through lots of trials and difficulties and emerges victorious to receive an award at the very end. Our last pattern is the pattern of females. And as in most early mythologies and just early stories in general, a lot of this is sexist and led to a lot of stereotypes in literature. So within mythology, there was really only two female archetypes or roles, and that was good or evil, and not much in between. So one example would be Medusa. And Medusa was a female, a mythological being who, by looking at you, could turn you to stone, and her hair was made of snakes. Now, she was a creature of pure evil and was only represented as being a female. There are a lot of other female witches and bad female villains who try to tempt or stop the heroes in a lot of their journeys and stories. On the other end of the spectrum, women would often represent good or purity and innocence. For example, we have the goddess Hathor in Indian mythologies, and she's represented as being a mother to all. She's good and kind. She's from where all are born and all come. She represents fertility in that case. And these are two very different roles, two very far ends of the spectrum. But those were the two main roles that women had in mythology, was either to tempt or kill the hero or the gods, or to be saved or be a mother to the other characters. So to look back at our document, hopefully at this point you have all of the notes taken for the examples for all of these elements. You were already given all of the explanations and definitions on the left here, so you shouldn't have had to write those down. If you haven't written the examples, just take a moment to pause the video and go back through to get them all written down. After you've written all the examples from my notes, I want you to think of where have you seen it? Where have you seen nature being used symbolically or colors being used symbolically? This again could be in a film, it could be in music, poetry, books, and old folk tales or fairy tales. Fairy tales are a great way to think of these different things. They often use these symbols as well. So try to think of an example, list it on the rightmost column, and once you're done, start this video up again. So at this point, you've done all of your notes for different patterns that we see within myths, and now we're going to study two myths. The first one is called How the Crocodile Got Its Skin, and it's from African mythology. And the second one is called Arachne the Spinner, and it is from Greek mythology. So we're going to examine where we might see these patterns within these two myths. So I'm going to read the first one as an example, and we'll do the first paragraph together so I can show you how I want you to annotate and how I want you to fill out parts of this table. So the first story is called How the Crocodile Got Its Skin. It's paraphrased from a book called The Secret of the Crocodile. And you see here it states that it's part of an oral tradition. What that means is this story's been passed down verbally, like a lot of myths and traditions have been. Not a lot of people could write, or they definitely couldn't record a lot of these stories. So they were passed down verbally from generation to generation. And these stories would often have, different parts to them. We might read myths that you've heard of, but has a different beginning, middle, or end. And that's just because they've been told by so many different people that they've changed a lot. But this one, to get it started, it starts, the crocodile originally had a smooth golden skin, and it stayed that way because the crocodile would spend all day in the muddy waters and only come out at night. All the other animals would come and admire its beautiful golden skin. The crocodile became very proud of its skin and started coming out of the water to bask in the other animals' admiration, even while the sun was shining. He began thinking he was better than the other animals and started bossing them around. The other African animals became bored with his change in attitude, and fewer started showing up to look at his skin. But each day that the crocodile exposed his skin to the sun, it would get uglier and bumpier and thicker, and was soon transformed into what looked like bulging armor. Crocodile never recovered from the humiliating shame, and even today will disappear from view when others approach, with only his eyes and nostrils above the surface of the water. So this right here, remember I talked about those 3 criteria of myth, and we're seeing all 3 of those criteria here. So the first one was talking about that it has, it's from a certain tradition, religion, or region, and that fits that right here. This comes from oral tradition in a region, Africa. So we're checking the first box for criteria for myth. The second thing is it's an explanation of some sort. And we're seeing here, this is explaining why the crocodile looks how it looks. It's saying it comes from this vanity of being out in the sun too long. It's trying to explain why it's bumpy and has this hard armor. And then third is those patterns. Does it have them? So let's take a look. If we scroll up, we see these patterns. Right away in the first paragraph, I can see that there are natural elements. So go ahead and highlight these natural elements in paragraph 1. It mentions the nature of it being in these muddy waters. So I'm going to highlight that. Pick any color you want. I'll just do yellow. And then it says that it only comes out at night. And that's what leads to its skin being so nice. Now, I don't want to just highlight. We talked about highlighting with a purpose. If I came back to this for a paper or an assignment, I might not know what these highlights mean. So I want to make sure that I put a comment with them. And maybe you just do that instead of highlighting because it highlights for you. And I'm going to write out natural elements right there. Maybe I'll make all natural elements yellow. I can do different highlight colors. The second thing is animals. So I see animals in the first paragraph. This whole story is about a crocodile. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to make it green for crocodile. And then I'll just put a little comment right here that says animals. All right. So looking at it, we also see colors. They mention golden skin here. So I'm gonna put that highlighted. We'll do, I already used yellow, so I'll do orange. Golden skin. Here we go. And I'll just put a comment here for colors. I didn't see anything for circles yet. In this first paragraph, nothing for creation, so why something was created or how it was created. No heroes and nothing for females. So that's just looking at the first paragraph. 2, 3, and 4, please highlight on your own. You might want to pause the video to do that really quick. Once you have everything highlighted, what I need you to do is take the quotes and you're going to copy them into the table because we're going to be comparing these 2 stories and I want you to have quotes for each. So for example, I have this quote about spending its day in the muddy waters and only coming out at night. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it into natural elements. And I put my quotes on either end. I'll put a little dot, dot, dot since I'm not putting the full sentence. Any other natural elements that come out in 2, 3, and 4 in those paragraphs, put them here as well, and fill out your quotes for every box where you see a pattern. Now, you might not see every pattern in every myth, so I'm not saying you should necessarily see heroes or females in all of these myths, but find what you can. So not every box may be filled out. But put all the quotes, so pause and do that now. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go over to your second story, and I want you to do the same thing but on your own this time. This is called Arachne the Spinner. This is a Greek myth, as I said, and I want you to find as many of the patterns as possible, highlight them within the story, and then I want you to copy the quotes over to the table on the Arachne the Spinner side, and then you are done with this assignment and can submit it. I hope you guys enjoyed this introduction to mythology and the patterns we often find within it.
And then it goes to how dogs